the most exciting release from Axial in quite some time. What's going on, everyone? Today we've got the brand new Axial SCX Pro here on the bench. Now, what this is something totally new for Axial. While there are some components here that will be familiar to you, and maybe the overall look of this will start to look increasingly more familiar to you as well. But what we've got here is Axial's take on the increasingly growing popularity of very performance-based, semi-scale to scale-ish rock crawlers, trail trucks, whatever you want to call it. As the market has continued to evolve, trucks went from the competition side rock crawlers where Axial got its start, like with the original AX10, and then it went almost completely scale only. And now it's kind of starting to go back a little bit towards its roots, but keeping the scale look as well. Now, what we have here in front of us is something that would resemble what you would often see used in competition type settings these days, but it's not only for use with competition. It's going to be a perfect choice for many people who just want like that performance first mindset. Big picture, what we've got here though is a flat rail chassis, AR45 based modular axle with a transmission that has a forward mounted motor. That's kind of big picture. I also have a body sitting here, but this body is not included, but will be available separately. And we'll get into some of the details. This truck is going to be coming as a roller. It does not include tires or wheels, no electronics, and no body. So you're going to just get the base of what you need to get started. And then you're going to have to choose those other components on your own. It is made to fit popular 1.9 class 2 size, or up to about a 4.75 inch tall tire. That's really what you can tell that it was made for. We'll start with the chassis, the transmission, and then we'll get into those modular axle housings. Before we get too far into it, I do want to note that this is a pre-production model, and there may be some very small differences between this and the final version. I haven't seen the final version, and I don't know of any specific changes. I believe that this is very close, if not almost exactly like the production model, but just something to caveat. I received this truck already assembled, although you'll receive it as a kit. It'll come in a very small box and you'll have everything to build up that slider like we talked about. Now, I have since received it, basically completely torn it apart and then rebuilt it just so that I was familiar with all of the items. However, I have not seen the instruction manual at this point, so if there's some small details that are noted in there, I may not be aware of that. The chassis on this is made from stamped aluminum. One difference between this and many flat rails that you may be familiar with is that there is no taper to it. It's straight from front to back. Oftentimes on chassis that you see from the aftermarket, they're a little bit wider in the center and then they pinch down at the front or back. Not the case with this one. It's a little bit wider through the center than a lot of common chassis. They kind of sit around that 70 millimeter normally as far as width from the inside of the rails. This one sits around 75, so a little bit wider, but consistent all the way through. So small difference there, something that may be worth noting. Now, it does have a chassis mounted servo. That's how it's set up right now. It does include a metal panhard mount here on the side, but it is also going to be coming with provisions to do an axle mounted servo. Now, I don't have the axle mounted servo plate, but I was told that it does include it. I haven't seen that exact setup. If you do go to axle mounted, you will need to convert to the 4-link, which I believe that they're including that link as well. So a few little changes, but it does give you the option to decide what style you want to run. Up front, we also have the position for a winch mount. The narrow front bumper has a fair lead molded in as well. Just behind that plate up front, we've got the forward motor mount setup. This is very similar to forward motor mounts that are on the market from the aftermarket currently. A number of manufacturers make just basically this exact same style of forward motor mount that bolts between the front shock towers. And that's pretty much what they've done here. On that motor mount, we have a 60-tooth, 32-pitch spur gear that's got an aluminum, very lightweight slipper lockout design behind it. That spur gear runs into a dog bone style drive shaft that runs from the motor mount to the transmission. The transmission is spaced off of that forward motor mount with a couple of posts like the VFD type transmission. The transmission is a long one. It really is a lot longer than I was expecting, but that is because it has a shifting mechanism in it for selectable overdrive, just like the VFD Twin first came with. However, the selectable overdrive was outlawed in Class 2 for competition for the 2023 rule set. So you will need to just select which of the overdrive options you want. You can have 1-to-1 or no overdrive in the transmission, or 40%. It is pretty simple to change from 1-to-1 to 40% by pulling a body clip that sits here on the bottom and then flipping down the little shift fork lever, pulling it back into place, putting it back in, and then replacing the body clip that just helps retain it. If you don't want to run that, there is a servo mount that sits right back here that you would put a micro servo in, like the SCX3 or the Capra has as well. The lock-off plate, or the plate that allows you to just lock the overdrive percentage in, is in the place of that servo mount. So it's a very simple thing to just remove, put the servo mount in, and hook up to that shift fork if you like. Now the transmission, to get it out, a bit of a pain. There is 4 screws on the bottom, which would be your first guess about how to get this out. However, it's not exactly that easy, because there's also 2 tiny M2 screws that go on the back part of the transmission here, as well as 2 in the front. So you either need to make sure that you can get to those with a driver, which can be a little bit tricky, or you just have to take the whole thing out, which you take out the 2 screws on the side, 2 down on the side of the skid plate, and then the 4 up in the front, and that will allow the transmission to drop down. Of course, it will come out with the skid plate, which the lower links are attached to. So you almost need to pull those out as well to try and get the whole assembly separate. If you do that, you'll be able to take this whole thing out as one, and then you can remove the screws from the front and back of the drive. It's just a little kind of figured in there, a bit of an oddity, but the transmission is open on the bottom portion of it. The transmission itself is fully supporting itself as far as bearing pockets and things like that. There's no like split half design, but the gears are exposed on the bottom side. So you can see the shift linkage and things like that. The transmission has kind of a 3-gear setup here in the front. It's got an 18-tooth top gear, then a 26-tooth idler gear, and a 40-tooth bottom gear. That idler gear, the center gear of the 3, has a long shaft that goes back, and you'll find 2 more gears on that. That's what controls the rear output, and that's where you get that selectable overdrive. Those 2 gear sets, you have a 20-46 and you have a 26-40. So those are all of the gears inside of the transmission. I haven't checked the math, but I assume that 40% overdrive figure is correct. Overall, that transmission assembly is pretty large. The gears are pretty big and hefty as well. The whole transmission assembly, including that front motor mount, the standoffs, the skid plate, the whole deal, that weighs 302 grams, just for a frame of reference. The shocks on this are an all-new design. They're a hard anodized body. The lower cartridge uses 2 standard O-rings and a plastic spacer, and it's all retained by this bottom piece that just threads on out of plastic. That bottom piece also is what holds that shock spring. Now, these shock springs are new, but they're compatible with the Losi Mini T rear springs, which were very commonly used in the comp world. So if you have those, or spring weights that you like already, you're going to be able to drop those right on. But I think they're also going to have more spring rates specifically for this additionally. The sliders on this are pretty long. They go all the way between each tire. I mean, they almost touch the 475 VXT2s. They touch just a little bit, as you're going, they'll kind of click or rub. And in the back, they're just right there as well. But that was made to fit this new body from Axial. I don't know the name of this specifically, and this paint job is one that you may recognize, commonly run, well, in a variation of it at least, run by Rich from Axial, who he let me borrow one of the bodies that he already had done for this video. But this body, very low profile, actually a hair too low profile. It's actually a little bit too short to fit the 2023 rule sets. So that may be why they didn't include it in the kit, but they are going to release it separately as well, just in case you're not much for the rules and you just want a super low slung body. To me, it looks very old school Losi grappler style as far as just some of the designs. I'd be interested to know if the designer of this was the same designer who did that one. Only thing that I will note is that it does have a very large and very flat roof. So it feels like it may want to rest on that roof if you're one to be prone to end up on your lid, which I may have been at times, but this fits those sliders very well as far as that overall length. Now, if you are running a body that doesn't have that much length in that area, the slider is a bit modular. You can take off this outside portion here, which kind of overlaps the slider base, and it takes off a good chunk of this rear portion of the slider. There's a lap joint here, but it actually takes off only about this portion back. So you end up with a shorter looking, more minimal slider, but it still gives you a lot of room for electronics and battery placement. On the driver's side is where you'll find the suspected battery placement location, where they've got the Velcro strap pre-installed. It's not a overly secure battery placement, which is not uncommon at all for this type of truck. So just be conscious of that. These trucks are more minimal than a full out scale truck that you may be used to. So this truck was built very much like you would see a lot of trucks being built already. I think they just kind of took the designs that were out there and made a production version of it, just kind of taking the popular trends and then doing their own impersonation of that. It'll give you a base to work from that is going to fit right into that market. This is a truck that is going to be very capable in that way. The lower links here are stainless. They're a smaller diameter than the real fat ones, and you do have high clearance links in the rear. So now we can get to those Pro 45 axles. That's what these new axles are being called. Now, these axles are a modular design, as I've said. And what that means is you've got a molded center pumpkin, and then you've got metal outer tubes. A modular design like this with a pumpkin and tubes has been done in the aftermarket for years and years and years. And this style specifically has been available for quite some time as well. But Axial's come out with their own version, and these are a steel tube, and these tubes are quite heavy. I measured just a single rear tube on this, and just the steel tube itself was 38 grams. Now, speaking of the tubes and a number of the other parts, Axial is going to be coming out with their own option parts for this truck, including brass tubes, carbon fiber chassis plates, and then I think they also have some like brass knuckles, diff covers, and stuff like that coming. So you're gonna see option parts for this truck supported. Now this is a straight axle, not a portal, so knuckles and C-hubs I believe are AR45 compatible as far as aftermarket upgrades. Front axle has a healthy offset. I'm guessing that it's the same as the existing AR45 axles. And then you've got a modular third link and panhard mount that slides over the tube separate from the outer C-hubs. That will make this axle very flexible, whether it be portal conversions or wider tubes without affecting geometry. Lots of options as far as that goes. The rear is a centered version of the exact same thing. Lower link mounts are separate, and it's just got standard caps on the outsides of those tubes. The center output on the rear axle does line up with the center output of the transmission. The front output of the transmission is also centered, so you can see that that drive shaft does kick over. No offset output as far as that goes. Motor clearance probably won't be a big issue, but sometimes those offset shafts will allow that motor to sit lower. But either way, I think it'll be all right. Speaking of sitting higher or lower, talking about ride height on this, they did make the shock adjustments all in an arc. Now, the point of that is to be that it doesn't affect ride height as you adjust your shock angle. As the shocks lay further and further down, they can become less effective, and that then still can affect your ride height. But I get what they were going for on that one. Another point that I haven't mentioned yet is that the lower skid plate is angled. It is angled at 3.8 degrees. Now that means that the skid plate from the front portion here towards the back goes uphill a little bit. Just trying to give you a little bit more breakover angle as the terrain would come underneath. Just try and give you a little bit more in that rear section. 3.8 is not an aggressive angle as far as that goes. I've seen chassis that have been up over that 7 and 8 degree, I believe. So 3.8 gives you a little bit of a benefit without going wild. Ring and pinions in the axles are the same AR44 machined gear set with the 6-bolt locker front and rear. I think that the gear set is the same in both axles. Now, while this truck may seem fairly simple and stripped down, there is still a lot to it. We are going to go over the details of this truck more in depth again tonight, the night that this video is released, in a live video. So you can come join in on that, question and answer. We'll tear back into it. I'll show you the parts up close if there was something that you wanted a better look at. I think we're also going to have Rich from Horizon on to answer some questions as well. Now, the price on this kit at the time of launch, or time of this video is recorded, is going to be $429. So that's going to be your kit as a slider, no wheels, tires, or body, but you'll get everything else. If you were to piece together a custom truck like this to try and build your own base from, you would likely end up being significantly more expensive. This is definitely just going to ease that. It's going to allow you to just jump into this area quickly, easily, and with a nice instruction set, I expect. We'll see what it looks like when I get my production version shortly after this video goes out as well. Being that this truck was a pre-production version, I was not given permission to go drive this one yet. So I don't know exactly how it drives. I haven't put a motor in it or anything like that since we couldn't get it out there. But I've been around enough of these that I expect this to be very much in line with a lot of the other options that are out there, because in the end, it's built very similarly to a lot of them. So I don't expect to be blown away with new features or anything like that. And I also don't expect to be disappointed in the slightest, because again, it's what everybody in the market is doing right now. Axial just made it a one-click buy option. It's been awesome to take a look at this truck, and I'm also really looking forward to seeing the final production version as well, so that I can get it out on the rocks. I can see some of the other parts that I didn't get to see, like the axle mounted front servo mount. I think that'll be a solid addition to this kit as well. Let me know what you think about the new SCX Pro. Put it in the comments below. What would you have liked to see? Would you have rather seen it come with tires and wheels, with a body, a different body? What are your thoughts? Or what do you plan to build with it? But with that, thanks for watching this episode. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. And thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one.